All of downtown Aleppo tonight is filled with people celebrating. It's a huge development, the most significant victory by pro-government forces for the duration of this conflict that's now lasted almost 6 years. But despite the happy faces around me, people chanting in support of the president and the army, of course it's been an extremely painful journey getting here. Tens of thousands of people have lost their lives. Most of the people living in Aleppo have been displaced. It's estimated that around 50% of the population have been forced to leave the city, and of course much of the city has been destroyed. Now, I've spent months in Aleppo in the last year, and I haven't really met anybody here that hasn't been affected by the war. Many parents have lost their children. Many children have been left orphans by this conflict.
أبوي ميت صار له 5 أيام.
أنت شفتهم عم بيقتلوا أهلك؟
إيه.
وين عائلتك؟
ميتين كلهم. ضربوهم قذيفة المسلحين.
But something struck me today. We left Sheikh Said early this morning, just hours after it was retaken by pro-government forces. And there we met a man, a soldier, who wasn't involved in the battle to take Sheikh Said, but he was there returning to his home. It was almost as though he was waiting for the second that he could safely return to his home, even though that he knew that it had been destroyed. And that's really the sense that I get from many people here, that once they've done with their celebrations, that they are eagerly waiting to rebuild their homes, their families, and of course their city.
Adrian Willie 36 minutes middle. Confused by what's happening in Aleppo and Syria in general? Here's a simple synopsis. Syrian President Assad's forces have driven both the Syrian rebels and ISIS out of Aleppo, with assistance from Russia. People there are celebrating in the streets, and the U.S. State Department is calling it a horrible tragedy. Most of the people in Aleppo probably don't care about the ideology, they're just glad the fighting has ended. Both the U.S.-backed rebels and ISIS are withdrawing to Palmyra and Iraq. So, why is the U.S. State Department upset that ISIS/ISIL has been driven out of Aleppo, and the fighting there has ended? Because they are backing the other side of this war. When you hear U.S.-backed Syrian rebels in the media, they're generally talking about any group who opposes Assad. The major players opposing Assad include the Free Syrian Army (FSA), the Syrian Democratic Forces (SDF), al-Nusra, formerly Al-Qaeda, and ISIS/ISIL. The U.S. government has supplied at least 2,000 tons of weapons and ammunition to the FSA and SDF in the past 2 years. At least that's how much we know about. Sometimes, the U.S.-backed rebels also includes factions of ISIS, if Senator John McCain is to be believed. That's right, the U.S. government seems to be totally okay with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, as long as they're fighting against Assad. It's that whole enemy of my enemy foreign policy rearing its ugly head again. Alliances between the various anti-Assad groups are constantly being formed and broken. Fighting between the groups is common. Currently, ISIS/ISIL is sometimes cooperating with FSA and sometimes fighting them, depending on the situation. Part of al-Nusra/Al-Qaeda is fighting part of the FSA and another part is fighting ISIS. Some other Al-Qaeda groups are fighting the SDF and ISIS/ISIL. The SDF is consistently fighting ISIS/ISIL and Al-Qaeda, but also occasionally fights the FSA. Forces within the FSA are fighting each other. There are at least a dozen other smaller factions that are all either enemies or allies of the above groups, depending on the day. The only common thread is all of them are fighting Assad. So obviously, with all the inter-alliances between the various factions, many of the US-supplied weapons end up in the hands of ISIL/ISIS, either through conquest or occasional cooperation with other groups. That means the US is supplying arms to everyone who opposes Assad, including some of our mortal enemies. And, yes, both the Pentagon and the CIA are fully aware that these weapons are making their way to ISIS and Al-Qaeda. It's part of their game plan in Syria. Just like in the good old days of the Cold War, Russia is our real nemesis in this fight. Russia backs Assad completely, and will defend him against all comers. The primary U.S. mission is to topple Assad, and they don't care who fills the vacuum. That's why the U.S. government isn't too concerned about helping Al-Qaeda and ISIS/ISIL, as long as it helps them achieve the primary objective of taking down Assad. We're repeating the exact same mistakes as when the U.S. government gave weapons to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan to fight the Russians in the 1980s. As you know, the CIA's middleman for supplying weapons to the Mujahideen was a guy named Osama bin Laden. We all know how well that turned out for us. But, because of the bizarre and nearly incomprehensible bedfellows in the Syrian war, occasionally Russia and the US share common allies. The SDF is one group that is supported by both the US and Russia. The SDF seems to hate ISIS/ISIL a little more than they hate Assad, which is probably why the Russians help them. But the Russians bomb the FSA, because the FSA seems to hate Assad more than ISIS/ISIL. Confused? You should be. The more you know about this clusterfuck of a war, the less sense it makes. The one thing I know for sure is that there are no good guys, and there are no American national interests at stake. The first American soldier was killed in combat last month in Syria. More will follow if we continue on our current course. The United States government needs to immediately end all involvement in this quagmire. Our continued meddling will only lead to more suffering for the innocent people of Syria, and more wasted American blood and treasure.